And hello from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We welcome you to the SEI webinar series. Our presentation today is DevOps Security. Ignore it as much as you would ignore regular security. Depending on your location, we wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Shane McGraw. I'll be your moderator for today's presentation, and I'd like to thank you for attending. We want to make today as interactive as possible, so we will take questions throughout the presentation and again at the end of the presentation. You can submit any questions to our event staff at any point. You'll see a questions tab on your event console. Simply type in your question, click send, and we will address as many as we can throughout the presentation. We will also ask a few polling questions throughout today's presentation, and they will appear as a pop-up window on your screen. In fact, the first polling question we want to ask today is, how did you hear of today's event? You'll see that pop up now. Another 3 tabs I'd like to point out are the Files, Twitter, and Survey tabs. The Files tab has a PDF copy of all of the presentation slides today, along with other resources from CERT and their work on DevOps. Lastly, the Survey tab, we ask that you fill out at the end of the presentation, as your feedback is always greatly appreciated. For those of you using Twitter, be sure to follow @SEI News, and today's hashtag is SEI Webinar. Once again, you'll want to follow @SEI News, and the hashtag is SEI Webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Timothy Palko is a software engineer and developer with a background in a variety of languages and tools, starting with a Commodore 64 in 1987. His experiences working in different cultures, from startup to enterprise, have helped him focus on improving the development process. Since joining CERT full-time in 2012, Tim has designed and built tools to support on-demand virtualized machines, network monitoring and analysis, and wireless sensoring monitoring. Christopher Tashner worked for a U.S. Department of Defense agency for over 5 years before joining CERT in 2006. His area of specialty and training include cryptanalysis, reverse engineering, software development, web application development, vulnerability analysis, and digital forensics. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Palko. Tim, welcome. All yours.
Thanks, Shane. Hi, welcome. You might notice the title of the presentation today is a little bit of a joke about ignoring security as much as you would ignore regular security in the DevOps space. And it's kind of a joke because, security is often one of the first things that's kind of shuttled off the development process after you get through testing and all the time that you try to build in for release and all of that. But the point I guess I was trying to make, with the title is that with DevOps, you can't ignore security any more than you would on any other type of space. And it's not to say that we ignore security all the time. We always pay attention to things like authentication and permissions issues, SQL injection, and the like. But in DevOps, there's so much energy going toward the change that it requires to transition your team to be using new technologies, and you're kind of changing your culture. It's definitely easy to forget about security. So what we're going to talk about today is really security in this kind of specific to DevOps. So this graph kind of shows how a common understanding of what DevOps is, and maybe a quick introduction for people who may not be familiar with DevOps or the concepts. DevOps is really, it's not about merging these 3 groups together as the diagram might have you believe, but it's more about addressing a problem where in a lot of spaces you might have a development team that kind of on a waterfall approach will do their design and development and then pass it off to QA who does testing, and maybe they go back and forth a little bit. And then when they're ready and the software is ready, then they pass it to the operations people. And that's more of like a waterfall approach, and that's how you would experience these kinds of things in a siloed environment. But that's not really how DevOps intends it to happen. What we're looking to do is more pull these teams together so they're working together from day one rather than in that waterfall kind of approach. So that's really the cultural aspect of DevOps, and then of course you have all the automation technology that's associated with DevOps, continuous integration and continuous deployment. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit about some of the technologies associated with DevOps, and also the some cultural aspects as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the term DevOps security, I actually I Googled DevOps security just recently, just to see what turned up. DevOps security isn't really a thing. Like, it's not a job, it's not a role, it's not maybe something that you would include as part of a software development project. But what we're talking about really is just security in the context of DevOps. So security has a lot of roles. Security has its place in a software development project, but what we're going to focus on today is security in that, specific to what DevOps talks about.
Right. I mean, what we're talking about really is, what are your quality attributes when you're going into your software project? I mean, if your organization is really concerned, about security, that's sort of where what we're about to talk about comes in, right?
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay, so we have a quick polling question we're going to pose now, just to get an idea of where you're at in the audience. And that question is, at what point do you as an organization consider security? At the very beginning, sometime in the middle, toward the end, or D, not at all? So we'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to vote. We'll let these guys carry on, and we'll share the results in about another half a minute or so.
Okay. So these are the main topics we'll cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about, like I said before, the technologies associated with DevOps, automation, and Docker being those two, and see how we can apply security, or how security relates to these topics, and then some other things about security analysis, and more cultural aspects of DevOps. And I don't know, we'll get into it.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have our polling questions, the results here, 66% at the very beginning, 28% in the middle, 5% towards the end, and 2% not at all. So I'm imagining you're hoping most people were at the beginning.
Yeah, that's great.
That's where it needs to be addressed. So.
It's good people are being honest, though.
Yes,
So
yes, and there are some honest people out there.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. That's good to hear. So let's start off. When we start off thinking about DevOps, one of the first things we really talk about is infrastructure as code, or one of those key principles of DevOps is infrastructure as code. And really what we're talking about there is automation, right? I mean, we're talking about taking as many of those processes to stand up your infrastructure and to deploy to your infrastructure, and automating them out so that we don't rely on individuals, and we don't rely on, did I do every step in the process like I ought to have?
And in varying stages of manual, like sometimes it's really manual command lines. Sometimes you might have scripts in place, but there's a lot of human interaction, and it's about moving toward being more fully automated.
Right. And when people think about automation, one of the first things everybody seems to think about is speed, right? I mean, if I automate it, it's going to make it faster. And that's not always necessarily the case. But when we talk about automation, especially in the context of security, what we're really talking about is control. We want to make sure that the processes that we're automating, that we have absolute control over those processes, for reasons of, now we know exactly what's going to happen, and we can audit that.
Predictability too.
Yeah.
You have expectations, and it's tested.
Right. So with that in mind, there's still some issues with, security issues with automation. I mean, with infrastructure as code, we're adding a lot of stuff here. We're adding a lot of extra code. And as the old saying goes, all code has bugs, and so we're adding code. So in theory, we're adding a lot of bugs here.
Yeah, a lot of code, and potentially, because we're taking every single aspect of what will be your infrastructure, and networking aspects, and configuring firewalls and configuration files for different services, and we're translating that all into scripts,
right?
Basically, and we're also adding third-party code. It's not something that you wrote. So, say for instance, Chef or Puppet, or deploying Docker containers, and we'll talk about that too. But all this third-party code that you didn't write at all, and you're relying on that code to be secure.
Yeah. So this is all sorts of extra stuff that you have to make sure, make sure that those third-party things are patched, and updated as often as possible, and make sure that your code doesn't introduce any additional areas that an attacker or somebody malicious might take advantage of.
Right. Yeah, because it's this automation is additional programs running, and every program that runs is another thing that can be attacked.
Right. And with DevOps, even though that we are trying to take out some of the manual processes, or a lot of the manual processes, not everything needs to be or should be automated. I mean, in some places, you want to have eyes on code or eyes on the results of automation or something like that. You want to have some gates in there in your continuous deployment or your continuous integration cycle where, there's a little bit of sanity check. Not all automation tools are going to be able to, or most automation tools aren't going to be able to do every last thing and make sure that every last check actually performed properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not, the system isn't perfect yet, basically.
Right.
Nor should we expect that it ever will be.
Right.
Really. And if someone claims that they have a perfect system, then be wary. It's probably not true.
Yeah. So you should be drawing parameters around the things that you trust, and really looking at your system and making sure that the automation that you have in place, or that you're going to be putting in place, makes the most sense for what you're doing.
Right. And it's to the second point, I think, in the slide, that is whatever paranoia you had when you first wrote those shell scripts that you might be using today, you have to maintain that sense of paranoia. You can't relax just because you're using someone else's tool their tool is well tested, but you still have to be paranoid about it. Right. The second topic is the false sense of security that you have about DevOps. There's a lot of hype about DevOps. If you've been to a DevOps conference, there's a lot of energy in the room about how great it is and what problems it can solve for you. But the thing to remember is that DevOps is not a cure-all. DevOps can help improve your process. DevOps can help make things faster, and it could do a lot for you. But it could bring your team closer together. It could help you ship a better product. But the thing to not do is get comfortable just because you're using this thing that's supposedly making everything better. So do not relax. And while your application code becomes stronger because you may be doing more code reviews, and you may be testing your code more often, and you may have more eyes on your code, and you may be talking about all these problems more often, in the application space, you have to understand that with the automation, with continuous integration and continuous deployment, your backend, your infrastructure, all the scripts that are provisioning your servers, that whole space just got huge. So like Chris was saying earlier, we have all these additional tools and scripts that are running to create your environment. Well, it's really just a point we already made.
Yeah.
You really just need to pay attention to that, because you have application code, and now you also have code for infrastructure.
Yeah. And like you say, I mean, DevOps is going to make your application better, just by getting more eyes on the code and doing and all that stuff. And from that aspect, in theory, it is going to get better in a security sense. But you have to keep in your mind and keep at the front of your project eyes on, what attributes do you care about? What does your business care about? What sorts of quality attributes are you interested in? And if security is one of them, what kind of security are you interested in? I mean, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable for your application, and design and build towards that, and not just buy into the perception of DevOps being the magic bullet.
Right.
And I mean, with things like continuous integration, there's other problems that can arise with DevOps, things that you might not really even consider when you're first putting these into place. And one of those we have up there: continuous integration crossed out, and continuous sabotage. I mean, the idea being that, something as innocuous as a continuous integration cycle, which is going to help you in a situation where you have a security flaw. Continuous integration and continuous deployment are going to help you get that security patch on your application out quickly and relatively painlessly. But at the same time, if you have an insider threat, if you have someone that's disgruntled, or that wants to make some trouble or make some money off of your application, that's working inside, they might be able to quickly and easily, if your continuous integration is a push of a button that only a couple people have to deal with, or one person has to deal with, then that hole can get out into your application pretty quickly.
Yeah, once everything is automated to a point, and you get comfortable with it, which you shouldn't do. That somebody makes a change like that, and all of a sudden, for weeks, if you don't pay attention to it, you could be very vulnerable.
Right.
So,
this might be a good time to see if we have any questions.
Yes, absolutely. We got a good one in the queue here from Steve, wanting to know: some senior management, CEOs, CTO, can sometimes feel removed from the technical day-to-day operations and are hesitant to implement DevOps due to the perceived risk of giving up too much unsupervised and unaudited power to people they don't directly trust. How can DevOps security mitigate these concerns?
that's an interesting question. That's heavily based in the culture of a team,
right?
Really, and I think if I understand the question correctly, there's concern that that DevOps will somehow remove power. I think maybe from
maybe give the coder too much power.
Oh,
right?
okay.
On that code, is there a way to mitigate that risk?
And actually, that's kind of a problem that DevOps itself solves if implemented correctly, because what we're doing is DevOps is really, it's all about breaking down silos. So you have teams working in silos, and instead of having walls put up for communication, you now have free-flowing communication. And this concept of, and we didn't bring it up yet, did we? But shifting left,
not yet,
kind of, but
yeah.
We kind of skipped over that. But this idea that from day one, all of the teams working on a software development project are working together at the same table from the first day of the project. So the idea being that if you're concerned that there's a particular team or particular people who might run with too much momentum, the idea is that really shouldn't happen at all, because people are talking and communicating from day one. And those people, the management, would be sitting at the table
and there's
also.
Checks and balances. You can see what.
It's all a conversation from day one. So that's not even so much a DevOps security question so much as it is just about properly implementing DevOps.
Right. The other thing too, we mentioned earlier how automation, there's a good idea to put in gates. To put in, when you're adding your automation, to put in some stops where it doesn't just automatically the code doesn't just automatically fly out, depending on if any given developer decides to deploy, that there is some sanity check involved. I mean, at that point too, you can have multiple people have to see it or something like that, where it's not just, this one developer has all the power, or much more power to push something out into the world than otherwise, without that continuous integration and deployment automation added to your application. Mm-hmm. Then now you have all this power given to lowly developers, or
right.
some guy that's
right.
only been there for
right.
or a contractor or something like that. Now you can add that. Okay, somebody wants to deploy. What are they trying to deploy? In there.
Right.
Check.
Right. Everyone's eyes are on the problem.
Right.
Also, I think maybe another interpretation of the question, won't spend too much time on it, but is that, and I'm going to back up actually to this slide, right, the Venn diagram. So this DevOps is not about merging roles. So we're not taking a particular role like development and saying, well, you're also going to do release management, and you're also going to do provisioning of the servers. That's not saying this at all. The developer still maintains his responsibilities as a developer. The operation still maintains the responsibility as operations. And the same goes with QA. And the same goes with if you have a security role defined in your organization or a security team, they're still doing security. That's their domain expertise. Yeah. And so that's what they should be doing. So it's not about merging these into a single role or providing anyone with unilateral ability to just do whatever they want with the application. It's really about everyone maintains their separate responsibilities, but they're working more closely together.
Right.
Okay, we got more questions. We'll come back to them throughout the presentation, so we'll let you guys move on.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so how does security DevOps like? So this is kind of talking about security as you could address security with your project how you would normally. So right. You have your security team, and they come in when they come in, and they're involved in the project. But then to do it in a DevOps style, like we were saying before, it's all about shifting left. It's all about bringing areas of concern into focus from day one. And so you're talking about the security person sitting at the desk from the first day of the project, right. Planning before any code is written, before the architecture is even thought about. That whiteboarding session when everyone's kind of brainstorming, like, how do we solve this problem? We have security people sitting in the room seeing that creative process going on.
Right. I mean, that's pretty, it's pretty well thought of in when you think about DevOps, that we're going to add, developers, we're going to add the operations guys to that mix, we're going to add QA testers to that mix, and this is just the idea of adding an additional people. We're adding security guys to this mix.
Yeah, and it can. I guess there's concern that it could be kind of hairy. There's a lot of people in the room. Yep. There's a lot of opinions, but if you have defined areas of responsibility, and this is more into challenges of adopting DevOps, but if you focus on what you're supposed to focus on, and everyone knows their role and they know when to pitch in ideas, then it can work really well.
Yeah, and to that point, there's a lot of people in the room. One of the big things you have to really think about at the very beginning there, again, is what are you building towards? What are your quality attributes? What does the business care about? And what's acceptable, what's unacceptable risks, and
what level of security do you actually want to attain?
Right.
How much effort do you want to put into that?
Yeah, some places are fine with their application being brought down by a DOS occasionally, and there's an acceptable level of if it's just a DOS, that's not going to be the worst thing in the world, Whereas some applications, absolutely cannot be down. The longer they're down, the more money that the company is losing.
Right.
And so you have to think about that. that just those thoughts change a lot of. Okay, well, we're going to build in this type of security versus this type of thing.
Right.
And
and if the security folks are rolling into that conversation a month late, that's wasted time and effort that you put in toward implementing something that you may not need to implement, whereas they knew what should have happened back then.
Yeah.
So we have two links on the page. One is for rugged software, which is a concept. It's as I understand it, very much a philosophy of developing software that kind of states that you go into software development understanding that code will break. And there will be people that try to attack your application if you're online, say, or your code will have bugs and you will have problems with your code. And to design and develop the code in such a way that it is robust and it will withstand these problems that it's going to face. So it's basically acknowledging the chaos that.
Yeah, acknowledging that chaos, and then trying to build into your application how are we going to be able to react to that? Like if there's a DOS, how can we get back up quickly?
Right.
Or if we get popped in this way or that way, what is the system going to be able to do to react?
Yeah.
That's a lot of what that's about.
Yeah. There's a lot of planning going into it.
Yeah.
Really a lot of understanding what your organization is about and how it's going to work.
Right, which can be a little bit of a shift for some organizations. I mean, a lot of organizations, when they think about security, they think about different standards that they have to work towards. Different, there's different, things out there that prescribe, we've got to go through this checklist, and then we're secure enough for this, for what we're looking at. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes those checklists, I mean, they're not going to be built for your application specifically, So sometimes those checklists aren't sufficient.
Right. Yeah, there's not a fix for everything. A single fix for everything. It's very tailored.
The other link that we have on there is to Gauntlet. Gauntlet is a testing platform. The idea is to create security testing as code, so that you can roll up whatever security testing you would normally have done into scripts that Gauntlet will run on a few tools. They support right now, I think, 5 or 6 tools, including curl and map and a few other ones, as well as a command line. So you can just write generic for the command line tool scripts that will run whatever tool just runs on the command line. And then you can, plug that directly into your normal testing and integration process.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And you could automate that. Mm-hmm. You may not want to automate it completely.
Right.
But you can automate it, and you can get it. Definitely adds to the project testing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's going to lead us to our next polling question, and I wanted to just address something real quick. We might have a blip with our connection, so we've got a couple people chiming in that their video may be frozen. Just log in and out of the webinar with the same link you had before, and that will give you a new, fresh video feed. So we are just acknowledging a couple people having that issue here this afternoon. So the polling question we want to know is, does your organization have a dedicated security role? And by that, is it a CISO? Is that what you're looking for? Or what other roles may be a dedicated security role that people answering a question at home?
Anybody that's involved in any role that's has a direct responsibility to the software development process, that would be the domain expertise is the security of the application code itself.
Okay. And while we're giving you a couple seconds to vote here, folks, we're getting lots of questions about if the slides are available to the presentation along with the archive. The slides are in the Materials tab now. You can walk away with a PDF copy of the slides along with other SEI Insert work on DevOps. And the event is being archived as well. The archive will be up most likely some point tomorrow. Same login information that you used today. So let's show our results here. And about 72% yes, they have a dedicated security role, 14% no, and 14% not sure. So I'm assuming you're looking for a higher number that a dedicated role. So
yeah, that's
it's good. Keep those security people involved.
That's right.
yes, yeah. And for those that don't know, find out and start involving those security people as much as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, back to you guys.
All right.
Okay, Docker. So Docker, a quick 30-second, if you're not familiar with Docker, if you haven't used Docker, Docker is a way of using, it's basically using Linux kernel constructs to section off isolated execution environments for code. So it's a way of quickly, another way of saying it is a way to quickly deploy your application code as a running container to your customer or to release it to the wild. And a container basically holds everything that needs to run your software. And it's easy to package that container up. And there's a Docker hub. It's a registry of the images, basically. And so you package your software up as an image, and you can push it to the registry, and other people can pull it down and run it without needing any other requirements on their system. Right now, I believe it is only Linux only. It doesn't run on Windows yet, but Linux is huge, so it covers a lot of bases. But so Docker is a very popular technology in DevOps. It's simply because of the fact that you can automate the creation of these containers. So you have your application code. You can build a container that holds all of your application code. You can automate the deployment of that container. You can automate everything about it. And so it fits very nicely into the continuous integration, continuous deployment.
And it's quick to bring them up and take them down. And
yes.
It's very, very portable, very fast. I mean, a lot of people would compare them to virtual machines, and in some ways that's true. But in a lot of ways it's not true. With these containers, you almost sort of get this feeling that you're running your code in this sandboxed environment, this completely isolated environment, and that's not always the case. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, Docker is concerned about security, and they are trying their best to keep your processes from affecting anything else on that machine. And right now they're doing this in a couple of different ways, but right now the primary way they're doing it is with these Linux namespaces. And basically Linux namespaces, can allow you to, your process to run in one of these Docker containers, and as if it's really only see what's in that container, within that within its own namespace.
Right. The namespaces are used so there's the aspects of running processes on a machine, such as the process ID is managed by a namespace.
Right.
And so to create a container, the Linux namespace is used to provide an isolated path for all processes to be assigned a process ID within that container, so that they don't see other process IDs in other containers.
Right.
Or on the host.
Right. And I mean, so this feels very much like a virtual machine. And at least for KVM, Linux's KVM, the kernel-based virtual machine that they have, that is a little different how that runs. Actually has hardware to help aid with that separation. It's not necessarily you're not just using the Linux the namespaces there. There's other stuff involved. So with Docker, what that means is, what this namespace thing means is that you're running those processes. You're still running on the Linux kernel.
Right.
So if your container, if something happens with your container and somebody takes advantage, runs a process that is going to subvert those Linux namespaces in the kernel,
right?
They could get access to your kernel.
Right. That's a potential. That's something that could happen.
Right.
Right. And there was a way they had a release last June where there was a problem, and if I'm remembering correctly, there was a hack where within a container, a process running inside the container could access and modify things on the host inside the kernel and gain access to other containers, which was quickly patched. But things like that happen.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. And another way that you could use containers poorly, I guess, is you could share. The idea is when you create a container, you share files. You can share files from the host system that's running all of the containers into that container. So you could share the root file system as, say, /host inside the container, and as root inside the container, you can modify any file. So there's things that you need to be aware of if you're running a container registry or an image registry. If you're running a Docker registry, anybody, and you're allowing people to post images to that registry, and you're allowing people to spin up containers on that registry or spin up containers. There's nothing that says in Docker we're going to check to see what all these different containers are doing.
Right.
That's really up to the people that are posting them. And the same thing goes with pulling images down and running them on your own. You could pull somebody else's image down and run it as a container on your own machine, and who knows what it's going to do. You have to look at the configuration for the container and make sure that it's
Right.
it's actually doing what it says it's going to do, and it's not going to hurt your system.
Right. A little while ago, there was an article out saying that somebody had looked through the public registry, the Docker public registry, that the images in there, 30% of them were vulnerable. I don't know how they came up with the 30%, but
Yeah.
I mean that's a big number.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's something to really consider when you're thinking about, well, where am I going to get my image? Am I going to pull it down from the public registry, or am I going to create my own?
Right. Right.
Another thing that we really haven't mentioned yet is the Docker daemon itself.
Yes.
That would be the thing that controls all of these containers on the host system, and it has to run as root. There's no other option. So you really have to be careful about who you're going to give access to this Docker daemon to. I mean, you don't want to just let anybody have access to do anything with it, to do things with this daemon without some vetting, because they potentially could get into
Any container that's running on the host.
Yeah.
Yeah. Docker recommends in their documentation to, if you want to run this on a separate host, that host is dedicated to running the Docker daemon, and nothing else runs on that machine.
Right. Which, I mean, that's another thing that people running on a multi-tenant, system out in the world should think about. I mean, your container, you better trust who's, the owner of that multi-tenant system, because they're going to have access to your data, most likely. I mean, unless they're putting in their own private restrictions for themselves, they're going to have access to your data, and you have to assume they will.
Right.
Okay, it's going to lead us to our fifth and final polling question. Just wanting to know, we're going to pose it now, is do you use Docker? So we'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to vote on that. And while we're waiting for you to vote, I had mentioned a materials tab earlier. It's actually called a files tab. Right beneath the video window, you'll see a files tab. That's where all the resources from today are located. Also, a couple questions about if CEUs are available for logging in today, and they are. Just contact us after the event. We'll send out a follow-up email tomorrow about where to find the archive and resources, and you can reply back to that about how to get CEU credit for today's attendance. So let's show our results on who's using Docker. 18% yes, 82% no, not using Docker.
Okay.
I'd recommend giving it a shot.
Yeah. It is a nice tool.
It is.
With all the security concerns that it might have, it's still a very nice tool, and as long as you manage those security concerns and are mindful of them, you can use it very effectively and still be safe.
Yes. Yeah. So. Actually, we're going to continue talking about that a little bit and how you can use Docker. So number one thing that you can do is if you're hosting your own Docker registry, you can implement a certificate between the Docker daemon and the Docker registry. So that's saying that only the Docker daemon that you use, and by the way, your Docker daemon could run on your development machine, your laptop that you run on, or you could deploy it inside your environment. Mm-hmm. So you have your own private daemon that can be shared. And so that Docker daemon needs that certificate to talk to the registry. And in doing this, you're saying you're kind of restricting how many people can actually talk to the registry, push images to it, pull images from it. Right. So by limiting your audience, you're kind of tightening your security a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Another thing you should be aware of is the Docker does have a security document that they put out that goes over a lot of this information and a lot of the other information. Maybe we can get that link up at some point, on there. But and I mean, a couple other things that you should think about when you're with your Docker containers is, regardless of where you got that particular container, you should be mindful of a few things. One of the things is you should know what you have running on it. What packages do you have running? What are the versions on it? Are they all patched, and up to date? Are there security holes that out in the world that that have been found for any of your applications, any of those packages.
Any third-party tools you pull in, you should always do some research on them to see what they're...
Right.
Yeah.
And once you create a Docker, a container image, you really shouldn't be messing around with it for too much. Docker suggests that if you have to make changes, you basically create a new image. Major changes to the image once you've finalized it. So you can run. Docker does have a diff command, in which you can run that diff, and it'll tell you, okay, well, this is what we have in the registry, versus this is what you have running on your system, and here are the differences in there. So that's a good tool.
Yeah.
There's also a read-only option, is that you can run your container read-only, so that that nothing's going to get changed that way.
Right. Yeah. By default, when a container is started, it gets a read-write layer, and so the option to say we don't want to write anything is important.
Right.
Their documentation is actually pretty good. It's excellent. But of course, getting your hands to the keys is always the way to do it.
Right.
Anything else we want to talk about with Docker?
I think we pretty much covered it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So security analysis in the DevOps space. So first of all, what are we talking about with security analysis? So we're talking about looking at the application that we're building, and we're talking about how do we look at the software that we've built and determine if it's secure, right? You're basically making a determination of the quality attributes that you set out with initially to say, did we meet all of the things we wanted to meet with our security team?
Right.
Everyone had their input to it, and can we look at DevOps processes such as the measuring and the monitoring that are kind of prescribed with DevOps, and can we use those to determine anything about the security of our application?
Right.
And there's a lot of problems with that, and one of them is that by automating things as you do with DevOps, so you might automate security analysis testing, and you might automate running these tests to see how vulnerable your application might be.
Right.
And I'm probably not explaining this as well as you could. I'm going to give it a shot. But the results that you might get from this kind of security analysis in an automated way, looking for security vulnerabilities, aren't always something that you can act on easily. It's not always obvious what you're going to do as a result of a failed test.
Right. I mean, it's very important that when, with a lot of the continuous integration and a lot of the automated processes, to have some feedback coming back at you. You don't want to just, if it builds and if it runs, throw it out in the world or whatever. You want to be doing some tests on the new features that you've added, the new code that you've added every time that you're, before or as this continuous integration is being done, and you want some feedback from those tests. And this includes security tests, and actually, in a lot of ways, especially security tests. I mean, if you were running, say, a fuzzer, to throw packets at your application, at your new features that you've just added. The information that's coming back from that fuzzer, it might show, okay, well, if I throw this packet at it, I get some information back. Well, often, your security automation tool isn't going to have any idea if that packet is going to give an intruder information into your system that they could then use to craft a malicious packet that would be able to give them full access to the back end system first, let's say.
It takes more of a human touch to look at these kinds of things.
Yeah. It might just be spitting back gobbledygook that honestly just, doesn't mean it much to an attacker, or it could be giving back, basically a way to get into the command line, way to get root on your system. So, so it's important that as part of your feedback loop, that there's eyes on that, that somebody is somebody's taking a look, okay, well, this was the results. This is why it passed. This is why it failed. And this is what happened. Before just this blindly assuming, oh, everything's either great or bad.
Right. And this goes back again to automate. Go forth and automate. Yes. Automate everything you can, but at the same time, always be wary of what you're automating. Pull back. Always have those gates.
Right.
Human interaction with this stuff is really important.
Yeah.
Our last point is about everybody else that's maybe not directly on the project team. So you have this idea, you have quality attributes about security that you aim for, and you have ideas about how secure you want your application to be, and you as a technical person might feel very strongly about these kinds of things, but you also have people that are related to the project. So you have business developers, and you have your customers, or you have the general public. Well, you can't do anything about the general public, but you have a particular customer that you're shipping your product to, and you might feel a certain way about security, but that might not translate really to what the customer has as far as their requirements go for what the application needs to do. Right. And so you need to build time into the schedule to make sure that your security is in shape, and they may not want to do that. So you have to communicate with them in a way that conveys that importance.
Right. Basically, what we're saying here is push interacting with your users or with your customers left. We're trying to let's bring that interaction and try and do it up front, so that when you're starting to design your system, those concerns are forefront in your mind as you're designing, and what you're building towards is actually going to be used.
Right. Building the requirements for the system, what you're going to do, and if the customer is, and the business developers and managers, if they're on board from day one, it'll be transparent to them. It will be clear that you're aiming at security, that you're trying to get something done as far as security goes. Right. And if they have a problem with it, I guess that's the time to bring it up, and you get that out of the way early rather than face it later. Right. And security with interacting with customers can be, or people that aren't directly related to the project development itself, can be tricky, because the thing that you want to do to make the application more secure might make it too restrictive or alter the user experience to a point where it's not what the customer wants anymore.
Right.
Which is why it's a good thing to get this out in the open early, and then by the same token, what they want, the feature that they want to push to their application might be a vulnerability.
Right.
So they might want to say, let's put a text box on your web page that people can just type in whatever they want to, and the system has to do it. And that's
right.
It's
it's good to communicate with the users and the customer and all that. You don't necessarily have to always go, follow blindly whatever they want you to do.
Right.
But at the same time, this is a really great time to make sure that the quality attributes that you're building towards actually make sense, and make sense for your product, make sense for your business, and make sense for the customer base that you're the demographic you're aiming at.
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay, it looks like we're ready for some questions, I think, huh?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
we got lots of good questions in the queue. Just before we dive into that, folks, I wanted to just take a second to invite everybody to, if you have a LinkedIn account, to join us to the DevOps Forum. There's a LinkedIn group, so if you are on LinkedIn and go to the search box and go to the group tab and just search DevOps Forum, we invite you to join and continue the conversation from today, or future questions you have about your DevOps-related work. We have very staff monitoring that space. We'll be glad to interact with you there. So let's get into some questions. From a non-asking, where does bimodal IT, if you're familiar with that or not, I'll finish, but where does bimodal IT sit in this conversation? Can the terms bimodal IT and DevOps be used interchangeably? How are they related? So are you familiar with bimodal IT, first of all?
Actually, I'm not.
I'm not
Okay.
either. Yeah,
I'm not.
Sorry.
So Anon, maybe that's a question we log into the DevOps forum, and maybe there's going to be users out in the community that are, or feel free to chime back in with some more detail what you mean by that term, and we'll repose it to Tim and Chris in a moment. Let's go to Robert's question on how well does DevOps align with Agile concepts? Any important point we should be concerned about?
Well, DevOps is actually a lot of times considered to be an extension of Agile.
Okay.
So where Agile is focused on short sprints and being fluid and kind of ditching the waterfall approach to doing software development, it's basically doing that, but we're also including the operations folks. So Agile doesn't strictly prescribe, you need to talk to IT operations during the course of your sprints. But that's basically what DevOps is saying is we're going to basically do Agile, but we're going to pull more people to the table, and we're going to shift left more concerns from all of these different groups.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea is that the tooling and the culture of DevOps sort of builds on Agile's culture, and together they create a nice stack that will help the developers and everyone else involved create an application that's better.
Yeah.
Okay, Murray would like to know, are there some development initiatives that are not suited for DevOps? Should organizations entertain using a multiplicity of development approaches depending on what individual circumstances dictate?
I would say absolutely. I mean, it's what kind of development project do you think DevOps would not work in? Actually, doesn't. I don't think it. I think DevOps is a great idea for any project, just because all it is breaking down walls and collaborating more.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, that's one of the core features of it.
I mean, I could see certain aspects of DevOps, especially continuous deployment, which is the idea is that you can press a button and your application will be deployed out in the world or wherever onto whatever deployment platform it would reside. I could see that not fitting in with some.
That's true.
Some organizations might want to have their development environments and air gapped from the rest of where they're deploying. That makes sense, but that doesn't mean that you can't do DevOps. I mean,
some aspects of DevOps,
right? I mean,
but not all.
It's much DevOps. I mean, really is much more of a cultural thing than a tooling thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the tools might not fit in, but I can't imagine a situation where where it's not a better idea to have your developers, talking with operations people, talking with testers, talking with a lot of people at the beginning of
The security folks.
The security folks, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the project and throughout the life of the project, rather than starting development, going for a little while, then talking to operations guys or security guys or whomever,
Right.
and bringing them in later. I can't foresee a situation where that's not a benefit.
Yeah, I agree. And but continuous deployment, maybe not.
Right.
I mean,
a lot of that stuff. It's really dependent on what's your situation. You really have to take a good look at what am I going for, what's my environment, and what are my business needs, and does this fit in or not?
Right. And even we used the term waterfall earlier, and waterfall is associated with its software development process. We're gathering requirements, and then we're going to design the system. But waterfall, in the way we were using it, is more of like just the overall software project. So we're going to do all of the development, and then we're going to do all the testing, and then we're going to do all the interview release. And that is the waterfall method for software development, where you do the requirements gathering, and it's a sequential process.
Very linear.
It's very linear, and that does apply to some projects. So Agile is not for everybody. So the multifaceted kind of structure for developing a project, I think, works. And you could apply DevOps to waterfall.
Right.
There's no reason that you couldn't do a sequential project, where you do all your requirements gathering up front, but everyone's sitting at the table and everyone's talking about it. And then you go into the design phase. And so there's no reason you couldn't match that together with anything in DevOps work.
Yeah. And I think DevOps really was designed to work very well with Agile, but absolutely it can work with just about anything. I mean,
the cultural aspects of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great answer. Another question here. How should conventional security roles, both application and infrastructure, evolve to adapt the DevOps paradigm? Do you see SecDevOps emerge as a new concept?
Yeah. That's a term, DevOps SecDevOps.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a term that I've heard before.
Yeah,
we've
absolutely.
heard before.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Next question from Nooper asking, Amazon pushes a change through their continuous delivery pipeline every 11 seconds. Could you discuss how you could do security in that pipeline?
The way we're talking about it, having that human interaction, we think is very important.
Yeah.
So 11 seconds.
You might not be able to do it in that pipeline itself. I mean, in the continuous delivery pipeline, in that automation, but you definitely want to do it before you pushed. You'd want to make sure that when you're building, anytime that you're building a new feature into anything or changing a bit of code, you want to make sure that you're testing what you're changing, right? You want to write the unit tests to make sure that what you've just done actually fixes what you think was broken, or provides the feature that you think it provides without any issues. Whether you do it inside of a automated continuous deployment, inside of that particular infrastructure, or whether you do it, before that, doesn't necessarily matter. But I mean, certainly there should be some tests done to make sure that you're not introducing any security flaws, and you're not introducing any other types of vulnerabilities into that system.
So novice question for me, and maybe this is what you were just explaining. So if you're bringing someone else's code in, is there a way to make sure it's secure? Because I know we have secure coding standards here. Is there a way to apply those to someone else's code to make sure it is secure? Is that what it does?
Yeah, there are ways. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about Gauntlet, and a lot of the security. A lot of the testing tools that it uses, you could use something like that to take a look at your entire application. There's that stuff. There's also, like you said, we have the secure coding initiatives. You could use those tools. There's also fuzz testing that can be done on your application. And a lot of that obviously would happen in integration rather than deployment. Right. At that time.
Okay. Liz would like to know. Okay, they have a separate security team. It just says have a separate security team. Would you not have security functions working continually within the delivery team rather than siloed? Would this not lead to better buy-in from the delivery team, or some security as a drag on their velocity?
If I'm understanding that, that the security analysis would slow down the pace of the release.
That's
cycles.
how I'm reading it. Yeah.
This kind of relates back to the Amazon question previously. Is this short release cycle? And just because I guess the way I'm thinking about it is a release every 11 seconds. First of all, I don't know that necessarily means that there's change in the code every 11 seconds.
Sure.
They might be just deploying the latest, most tested, stable, released version of it. But that also means that developers committing code at the beginning of, say, a pipeline, I doubt that it's the developers commit code and then 11 seconds later it's deployed. It's probably committed, and then security can happen within that space, and there might be a delay while the security happens. Right. That's built into the process. Right. And so as long as that's accounted for and that's built in, it really shouldn't get in the way of operations or the release cycles, because the recycle, you could think of it as the the releasing of the code is pulling from a different bucket. It's not pulling from freshly deployed or freshly committed code. It's pulling from another bucket that's further on down the line that has had eyes on it, that has the security testing,
Right.
Standards applied to it, and make sure that it's stable. And
Right. There's also a little bit of a perception that security testing takes a long time, which can be true, but isn't necessarily. I mean, if you're really mindful about what type of security that you're concerned about, and what your application currently looks like, when you're changing the code and writing those new security tests, you can be very specific about what you're testing and how you're testing. Things that might start adding a lot more time to that might be things like fuzz testing. But again, you can pinpoint and really sort of tailor that fuzz testing towards what you want to exercise. What did you just create? What is important to you right now? Rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to leave this fuzz tester go on random for all night,
right.
Before I can deploy my code. Another thing too is that some places might find that it's more important for them to get a fix out the door right now, and if that fix leaves them vulnerable, that's acceptable risk for them right now. I mean, with the way that the way that this stuff works and how automated it is and how quick it is to deploy, that might be fine, and so you can push out your important fix and then in the background can start doing testing and things like that. Now, you'd have to make sure that whatever your business requirements are and whatever your acceptable risk is, that falls within that before even considering doing something like that. But I mean, that might be a possibility based on their scenario.
So I know we're 2:30, but if we can work in one more question as quick as we can. So from Debendu, asking, what is the best way to bring about DevOps transformation in a large traditional company that uses COTS vendor apps and presentation tier with SOA with legacy mainframe-based backends? Change percolates through each tier using different generations of technology and teams.
Okay, it sounds.
We have a quick answer for that.
It sounds like a bit of a mess, but it's a challenge worth addressing. Culturally, the stack is fairly irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Culturally, you can bring about a lot of good DevOps change simply by restructuring the way that you hold meetings, restructuring the way that you communicate, restructuring the way that you plan features for release. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of change that can happen without addressing the technology stack.
You need buy-in. You need a lot of buy-in. I mean,
yeah,
you need to get everybody on board. That especially like top down. That's really important.
That's the challenge. That's the challenge, and it's really dependent on. It's a personality thing, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no silver bullet to fix a problem like that.
Yeah. Good answer.
That's a hard one. Good luck with that.
Tim, Chris, thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Folks, that's going to wrap up our presentation today. Thank you again for attending. Upon exiting, we ask that you fill out that survey, as your feedback is always greatly appreciated. And just a last reminder, if we didn't get to your questions today, please go on LinkedIn, search for that DevOps forum, and post your questions there, and we will continue the conversation. Have a great day, everyone. Excellent job. Excellent. You guys are excellent.